Welcoming to the show for the first time, a new guest today. I am so pleased to introduce everyone to Captain Dan Hanley. Captain Dan, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks for inviting me.
It's wonderful to see you. Captain Dan is an airline employee. He's a whistleblower. He was a captain of a 777 for United Airlines, and he became a whistleblower after 9/11. Captain Dan is the gentleman who introduced David Hawkins to Field McConnell, enabling the world-famous cloud-centric crime scene investigation network that everybody knows as Able Danger. Dan, can you give us some background on your story? Tell us how you got involved with Field and in whistleblowing on 9/11, and what the Airline Pilots Association, United Airlines, and the FAA tried to do to you after that.
Well, actually, it isn't what they tried to do to me. It's what they did to me. Actually, I was JFK base 777 captain on 9/11. I was in Newark that day. I scheduled to go to London that night. So I thought we were under attack like everybody else did. I caught a train back home to Atlanta. I watched it on the news. And then as events broke in from the government and the news media, that poorly trained and inexperienced pilots, they weren't even private pilots, were flying the airplane. Having flown the Cessna aircraft 50 years ago back in the 60s, and then working my way up the ranks through the 757, 767, I knew it was impossible that private pilots could fly those airplanes. As time went on,
sorry, Dan, why exactly is it impossible? Is a jet just so much more complicated than the planes these guys were allegedly trained on?
Yeah, if you looked at the picture of a Cessna cockpit.
Dan? Did I lose you? I hope this is not going to be another one of these interviews. Dan, are you there? Have we got you,
Yes,
Dan?
I'm there.
Okay, sorry. When you look at the cockpit of a Cessna, you were saying?
Yeah, and you compare it to a 767, you realize that it was impossible for them to hop in the airplane their first time and flown the airplane.
Mm-hmm. It's just many more controls, much more complex, right?
Exactly. But as time went on, as I flew more flights to London, I realized there were huge gaping holes in the aviation security system. Like 90% of the luggage going into the belly of the aircraft wasn't being screened. There was no positive bag match on domestic flights where if a passenger checked a bag and got off the airplane, they wouldn't pull his bag. So if he checked a bomb with the luggage, it wouldn't be picked up. The Federal Air Marshal program was introduced, and they still have only 4,000 air marshals to cover 26,000 flights. So to me, the program was a farce. And they had made promises. They reinforced the cockpit door, but they made promises that they were going to provide secondary barrier protection for the flight attendants, cameras in the back of the aircraft, and the like, and none of that ever happened. So if 9/11 happened the way they told us, they were lying to us about the security process, and that raised my eyebrows besides the pilots not being trained. So I started out just having face-to-face conversations with pilots on layovers and my chief pilot and assistant chief pilot, pointing these things out, and I was getting a little blowback at the lower level in management. So I started an email process to actually start a correspondence trail for myself. I was even recording conversations to cover myself because I was going up against the largest airline in the world that was bankrupt at the time in bankruptcy court. So I followed that up as time went on, and I wasn't getting any response with something called a captain's report, which is a federally mandated report that you submit to the company. It's an internal report reporting these things, and I wasn't getting any response. And I was flying with flight attendants that believed the official story and were scared to death in the back of the airplane. Some of them were Newark-based, and their friends died on United 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. So they were pleading with me to say something, which I continued to do.
Well, now wait a minute. What do you mean? They were just scared in general of being on planes because it was so soon after 9/11?
That's correct.
And you discussed with this flight crew that you felt it was impossible that the event could have happened the way it was described because of everything you're telling us now? They couldn't fly the planes, etc.?
With a few people I shared that, but at that point in time, no, I just shared it with pilots that I knew.
And how did those pilots respond? Did they agree?
Some of them did, some of them didn't. But they all realized that the aviation security system was a farce.
What about the guys who disagreed? Sorry to interrupt, but the pilots who disagreed, how did they reconcile the whole complexity of the cockpit issue?
I don't know. But there were some out there that didn't believe. And to this day, Jason, there's a couple 100,000 airline pilots, and I don't hear any of them speaking out. And as I go through my story here, you'll understand why they're reluctant to speak out on issues like I did.
Sure.
Anyhow, I filed these captain reports, and I got a call from my union boss in New York, and he said, "Watch it, Dan. These guys are nasty." I said, "Who are you talking about, these guys?" He says, "I can't tell you." He says, "But you're going to get hurt." And I said, "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm following federal aviation regulations." So I said, "Who are these guys?" And he says, "I can't tell you." I said, "Look, if I got to get you in court at a later date to swear under oath," he says, "You get me in court and I'll give you names, dates, and places of what's going on here." And he left it at that. So that led me to believe that something was amiss. And then I got a call from the JFK flight standards pilot, who was a friend of mine. And he says, "Hey, Dan, if you take this to the next level, you're going to get hurt. It's going through the grapevine." He was, and then I got a call from a management pilot in Chicago who said, "Hey, Dan, the company thinks you're a big mouth, loose cannon whistleblower, and they want you to go away." And I said, "I'm just doing my job."
Wow.
So let me back up a little bit here. A lot of people, this is what I want to expose today. A lot of people aren't aware that in the past, if an airline or a union or the FAA wants to rid a dissident pilot, and I'll put that in quotes, they use professional, medical, or psychological or other grounds to terminate the pilot. I saw it happen in the past, and I knew that this was the case. Well, professionally, I never failed a check ride in my 35 years of flying. I never failed a medical or psychological screening. The only concern I had was they'd come up with some other issue. But to protect myself because of the warnings I was getting, I lived in Atlanta at the time, and I found the best psychiatrist and psychologist I could find. And I said, "Look, here's what I am. It's a tender subject, 9/11. I'm getting stonewalled by the company with threats. I need you. That's what I'm doing. Here's what they're going to do to me. And I want you to prove that I am psychologically sound," which they did. And I continued this throughout this process just to protect myself. So I was going to, actually it was right around shock and awe time, the Iraq War beginning, right, and the fact that the United Airlines announced they were going to terminate employee pensions because they were in bankruptcy, that I decided to launch my own shock and awe campaign, and decided I would write the chief executive officer of United Airlines, Glenn Felton, a letter.
Who was that at the time?
Pardon?
Who was the CEO of United at the time? Of course, this was prior to the merger of United Airlines with Continental, correct?
Correct. there was a man called Glenn Tilton who was brought in from Texaco as a hired gun
Really?
to bust up the union and destroy our contract, which he did a pretty good job of. He didn't bust the union, but he was ripping up the contract with the blessings of the bankruptcy judge that allegedly was corrupt. That's another story for another time.
Wow.
So I had this letter in hand, and I called my union boss.
Dan? Dan? We're losing you, Dan. Dan?
I want to forward it.
Sorry, take it back,
Yes?
Dan. We lost you there for a minute. You got a call from the union boss?
I called him, Jason. Well, I'm getting a poor internet connection. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Keep going.
I called him and told him I was going to send this letter to the CEO. And he said, would you please forward it to me first so I can send it to the union lawyers in Chicago? I said, sure, but I'm not going to sit on it forever. I've been getting stonewalled here. So he did that, and I waited about a week. And I was at JFK getting ready to go to London. And I called him and I said, Mark, if I don't have a response from the union by the time I get back, I'm sending that letter in. And basically the letter reiterated everything I just told you plus some. And I was over in the JFK food court having dinner with all kinds of people around me. And I got a call, and it was from Bob Nichols, the head lawyer for the union in Chicago. And he was on speakerphone with a guy named Chuck Pierce, who was the ALPA grievance committee chairman. And
We should tell people that ALPA, we should remind everybody that ALPA is the Airline Pilots Association, the union.
That's correct. So I said, Bob, did you read my letter? He said, yes. I said, do you agree with the contents? He said, yes. And I said, does it violate company policy, the ALPA Code of Ethics, or the Federal Aviation Regulations? And he said, no. I said, well, as my legal representative in the union, would you suggest that I send the letter in? He said, no. I said, why not? I thought you disagreed with everything I said. And Chuck Pierce, the grievance committee chairman, said, go ahead and send that letter in if you never want to fly another United airplane again in your life. I said, why? What are they going to do to me? And he said, verbatim, they will find a way professionally, medically, psychologically, or otherwise to ground you for life. So I says, well, thank you very much. How far can I expect union legal representation going forward? And they said, not very far.
Wow.
So now I knew I was on my own. So what I did, there was a federal report, and it's mandated by federal aviation regulations. It's called a Flight Safety Awareness Report. And where the previous reports I had filed were in-house, this brought the Federal Aviation Administration in because they were violating federal law, federal regulation. So I broke down what I wrote in the letter into 6 of these reports that you filed electronically on the computer. The next day I got up and I received a call from my assistant chief pilot in New York. And he said, you've been taken out of schedule without warrant. He said, you've been taken out of schedule and you can't fly another flight until you come up to New York. And I said, well, he says, you've raised a lot of eyebrows at the highest echelons of management. I said, I haven't done anything wrong. And ALPA has said they're not going to follow me in very far. If you want me to meet with you now, I'm going to have my own lawyer represent me, and we're going to tape record the proceedings. And he said no. Well, we said a few more things after that. I made several phone calls to the union, my chief pilot, my union boss up in New York. And to make a long story short, after a period of time, my chief pilot called me and said he was out at the Denver Training Center in Denver, on the Denver Training Center, and he ran into the chief flight surgeon for United Airlines. And the surgeon said, is Hanley one of yours? And he said, yes. And he said, put that expletive deleted on sick list. without my having seen an aeromedical professional. They put me on sick list. Well, you only get so many hours of sick list before you go non-pay. So more phone calls, emails, letters were sent, and we were getting at nowhere. We were at an impasse. So finally, when I was going to go non-pay, I called my chief pilot and said, okay, Bob, this is punitive now. I haven't done anything wrong, but filed some federal reports. And he says, I know, but you raised a lot of eyebrows. People are upset with you. So he says, what you can do to protect your job, to protect your pay, it's endorsed by the FAA, ALPA, and the company, is submit yourself to the Employee Assistance Program. Well, the Employee Assistance Program was set up for people with drinking problems, drug problems, family problems, financial problems, and the like, so that they could be brought out of the workplace, counseled, and then put back into their job. So he says, we can give you a first-class ticket up to Chicago. The only requirement in this program is that you agree to do whatever the company, the union, or medical professionals want you to do. Well, I kind of knew this was the setup that was coming, and I agreed to do this, which was probably a mistake. Right. So they flew me to Chicago. I went over and met the chief flight surgeon over there, and we talked for a while, and then he said it. He said, would you be willing to go over and visit with the company-appointed psychiatrist? And I said, sure. I've already spoke with mine in Atlanta, and they said I'm in good mental health. He says, you're seeing a psychiatrist? I said, yes, to protect myself. So the chief pilot from O'Hare and another pilot drove me over to what I thought was going to be a psychiatrist's office, and it turned out to be the Alexian Brothers Behavior.
Dan, you there? Dan? We're having some connection problems. Dan, can you hear me? Captain Dan. Okay, we're speaking right now with Dan Hanley, who is a 9/11 whistleblower and formerly a 777 captain with United Airlines. I can't say I'm surprised that we're having interference with Dan's call, but Dan, can you hear me? Okay, so we've lost Dan for a moment. We're going to try and get Dan back. Let me see if we can try an alternative to Skype here that sometimes gives us better results with these low bandwidth connections. Dan, I think we're disconnected, so let's see if we can restore Dan for us here. We're going to try and get Dan back. He's got a lot of good stuff to tell us. Okay. Dan?
Yes.
Okay, let's try it again. We got you back. Please carry on. So they wanted you to agree to do what the company told you, and they sent you to, where was it?
A mental hospital.
Right. Yeah, carry on, please. Dan?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, please continue. You're good to go.
Okay, so they were sending me to a mental hospital. Well, I thought, well, maybe the psychiatrist's office is there. So we go inside. I was with two pilots, and we sit down, and a Catholic nun who is a psychologist comes in and introduces herself. And here I'm sitting with this nun trying to explain to her how I got into her office and trying to describe the complexities of aviation safety reporting systems, security reporting systems. And so I was getting nowhere. We talked for quite a while, and then she said to me, the psychiatrist has gone home for the day. We can make arrangements for seeing her, you seeing her the first thing in the morning. We can set you up in a room here if you're agreeable, and you can get out of here right away. Big mistake. So I said, well, I was tired too because they got me up real early. Right. I said, okay, I'll stay here. Well, she takes me up the second floor. The first clue I had was the door locked behind me. Mm-hmm. Then they asked for my belt, my shoes. I thought I was going to get a private room. So they put me in a co-ed wing with a schizophrenic, paranoid man. The first night there, they insisted I take medication for sleeping, and I told them, no, I'm tired, I don't want to. They insisted anyhow. At 4 o'clock in the morning, they found me unconscious on the floor of my bedroom with my blood pressure 60/40 and a big lump on the side of my head where I'd fallen.
Do you know what that medication was that they gave you?
No, I'm not sure.
Wow.
But the next morning, they ran me to the emergency room where a doctor did a full flight physical on me. But the second day there, I was forced to go to group therapy sessions. It was very humiliating. Go to group therapy sessions, dine with these very sick people, and the psychiatrist still wasn't there. All I saw was a psychologist who just talked to me.
So they lied to you.
Me trying to. Pardon?
They lied to you. They basically, right. Yeah, this is like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Exactly. That's what I felt like. So the second day there, I was, my roommate snored real loud. So I went out in the hall about 4 o'clock in the morning to read a book under the light. And this man in a suit comes walking down the hall. It was dark, but at my end it was light. And he comes up, and he looked like a professional because the suit was one of those $2,000 jobs. And he says, hi, Dan, I know why you're here. And he started talking about my case, and I thought he was a doctor. And then he said to me, why don't you just drop what you're doing? And I said, what? No. I said, what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing as a pilot. I filed federal reports, and they've been stonewalled. He said, well, if you change your mind, let me know. So he walked away. I didn't know who that guy was. So finally, the third day there after my group therapy session, I get to see the psychiatrist. She comes in for about 20 minutes, and we have a casual conversation like we're having right now. And all smiles and no problem. And I said, well, they ran a couple of psychological tests on me yesterday, which were tests that I had taken with my medical professionals in Atlanta. And I said, how are you going to diagnose me, doctor?
Dan? Man, see, it keeps cutting out at these critical moments. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, we got your back. So you asked the doctor how you would be diagnosed, and
she says, I'm going to diagnose you as bipolar, when I hadn't exhibited anything that resembled bipolar disorder. I found out later this is one of the most common methods federal agencies use to dismiss employees because it's next to impossible to disprove in court.
Wow. What was the name of this mental hospital, Dan?
Lexian Brothers Behavioral Health Hospital.
Please continue.
So anyhow, I said to her, I have two mental health professionals in Atlanta that beg to disagree with your diagnosis, so I'll take that up with them. So I finally got out of the place. She agreed, okay. I was told later that once you check yourself into a mental health facility in Illinois, the state has the right to hold you up to 5 days.
Wow.
So it was like Hotel California. So anyhow, my wife, who's now my ex-wife, met me there, and she said that a doctor named Don Hudson from, he lived in Denver, he was a Alpha aeromedical consultant, had already called her Are you hearing me, Jason?
Yes, I hear you clearly.
Had already called her, and I knew at that point in time the skids were greased, that they were going to ground me. So I met back with my mental health professional in Atlanta, and I said, they've got me out of there on psychological grounds. I've been marginalized, but I'm still going to pursue this legally with the FAA. So I went out sometime later, and I filed what's known as an FAA whistleblower protection report. I filed it electronically. I waited a couple weeks, called the FAA, and they said they lost the report. So I refiled it electronically and filed it up with a certified mailing of the report. Plus, I included a very lengthy affidavit that went into much more detail than what I just told you. I waited a couple weeks and called them, and they said, well, it's going to take maybe 6 months to a year to process this thing. I said, well, that's too long. So more to the story, but I wrote the Department of Transportation, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security, saying, listen, federal regulations have been violated here, and it crosses state lines and it borderlines on RICO, which is racketeering, influence, and corrupt organizations.
On the part of United or the union?
All of them, the FAA, the union, and see, later, a few years later, Chuck Pierce, a grievance committee chairman I talked to, admitted to me that the FAA, Alpha, and United had railroaded me off the property. They didn't want a big mouth out on the line. So anyhow, the Department of Justice didn't answer my letter. Homeland Security deferred me back to the FAA. So after several phone calls, I saw I was getting nowhere with this. I wanted to report this process of elimination of pilots. So I wrote a letter to the Department of Transportation Inspector General, and I was put in contact with their chief complaint officer. He argued with me, and this went on for a couple of years, Jason. He argued with me that because I didn't follow some stupid regulation that said you had to report it to the Department of Labor within 60 days, that they couldn't move forward with my report. I said, look, I'm not trying to get my job back. I know that's over with. I'm just trying to report something that I know has gone on in the airline industry for years. Senior pilots in the industry called it the nuclear device, the last resort that airlines use to get rid of a pilot. So I started a blog talk radio program myself and brought in other whistleblowers that had this happen to them.
Right.
So jump ahead 3 years, because now people are going to say, well, this guy was in an insane asylum. Does he have any credibility? Well, let me bring in Field McConnell now. You said I met David Hawkins. Yes, he called me early December 2006, and he was looking for primarily a fighter pilot, airline pilot that would work with him, or any airline pilot and that had any military background. Well, at the time, I was deeply engaged with another issue, whistleblowing on judicial corruption surrounding the United bankruptcy. And I said, well, let me look around, let me think about it. Well, out of the clear blue on December 5th, a few days later, Field McConnell calls me. I didn't know who he was or anything.
He's in the chat with us right now, Dan. So if you like, later we could bring him onto the Skype call.
Okay, that would be great. Because he told me in this conversation that Northwest Airlines, he was a DC-10 captain there at the time,
yeah,
and ALPA and the FAA were trying to force him to see this notorious FAA psychiatrist in Los Angeles named Doc Elliott, who was well known that he would ground pilots on psychological ground. And I says, Phil, whatever you do, don't submit to that process, because I explained to him what happened to me.
Right.
And I don't remember how much longer after that, but Field retired early. and he lost millions in pay because he retired something like 11 years early.
Is that
I lost a lot of money.
Robert Elliott?
Pardon?
Is it Robert Elliott, that doctor?
I don't know what his first name was. Field could tell you.
Okay. Maybe should we call Field and add Field in?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, let's do that. Let me get Field on the line here so he can fill in some of the maybe some of the questions we might have. Or just give me 1 second. Carry on, Dan, please, while we're adding Field.
Okay. Well, Field was the first one to introduce me to the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. And for anybody that isn't aware of what that is, it is a system that was developed in the 90s. And what it does, it prevents any would-be hijacker from commandeering a commercial jet aircraft in flight by remotely taking control of the aircraft and landing it at any one of 108 airports in the world. Bush made a speech at 11 between 7 American and United 757s, and he made the statement that we're working on technology that will enable air traffic controllers to remotely take control of airplanes and land them on the ground. Well, he was lying because the technology was in place. Now, if you Google Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, you'll even get a Wikipedia article on it. And if you read that, they say it wasn't patented until 2006. Well, that might be the case, but it was that technology was available prior to 9/11. So you have to ask yourself, well, if the technology was there, why didn't they use it to put the airplanes on the ground when they knew they were being hijacked? Another system, the broader system, is called the flight termination system. And if you Google, I'm going to say a name here, Dov-Zakheim, that's D-O-V, Z as in zebra, A-C-H-E-I-M,
yep.
Flight termination. What you'll pull up are a bunch of videos, YouTube videos on Dov-Zakheim. And if you scroll down just below the videos, you'll see how to hijack an airplane from 9/11 to Malaysia Air 370. Watch the video there and you'll see what the system is all about. Well, Field told me all about the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, and then it all made sense to me. Then I realized I was right when saying pilots couldn't fly the airplanes. I contend, although I can't prove it, and I'm not sure Field can either, that system was used to cause those two airplanes to strike the Twin Towers. I further allege that no Muslims were involved in 9/11 and that there were no passengers, air crew, or hijackers on the two planes that hit the Twin Towers. Again, I can't prove that, but Field can fill you in on details on what he believes happened to the real airplanes.
Field, are you with us on the call?
Yes, I
There we go.
am, Jason. I've been listening since you started.
Good to have you, Field. So I think that you and I and Dan are in agreement on much of what he's just said. We've heard quite a bit about the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. We've heard a lot about Dov-Zakheim. I hadn't heard about Dov-Zakheim's involvement in this flight termination process. Dov-Zakheim has come into the conversation on Crowdsource the Truth because he was Scott Bennett's boss at Booz Allen Hamilton, and Scott Bennett has detailed how Dov-Zakheim and his son, Roger Zakheim, were involved in stopping Scott's progress in revealing details about terror finance. So we're filling in pieces of a puzzle here in a very interesting way. Field, what can you tell us about Dan's statements about the various planes that were utilized in some of these attacks? Do you want to turn your camera on, Field?
Oh, let me see if I can do that. In fact, yes, I think I can. I think I just turned my camera on. I don't know.
There you go.
I'm not in your YouTube right now because it was creating background noise for me. So I'll go into YouTube so I can be with your chatters in just a minute. everything Dan has said so far is not only 100% accurate, it's also 100% criminal that he has been treated this way. And if it weren't for Dan Hanley, I would have been treated the same way. But when it came time for Northwest to play hardball with me, I picked up the phone and I retired in 10 minutes. And so I'm very fortunate that I did not get the psychological diagnosis that every other whistleblowing pilot gets. And the thing that Dan has not addressed yet, I don't think, the reason why they want to take safety-focused airline pilots out of the cockpit, and the reason they use the mental health card is once a pilot gets a mental or a psychiatric diagnosis, they can no longer appear in court as an expert witness. And I am very fortunate that I am still an expert witness. And Dan doesn't know this. Jason, you might, because you seem to pay attention to a lot of stuff going on. But I anticipate filing a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit with the Pope at the Vatican on December 7th. And let's not waste time why I'm going to do that. In fact, we could do a show about it after. But Dan Hanley should be paid billions of dollars for what he tried to stop. And what he tried to stop was not 9/11 type of attacks like me. He tried to stop the raping of the retirement funds for all their employees. And a judge named Eugene Weaver was $30 million to shut down a $10 billion retirement fund, a retirement obligation. And whether a pilot is honorable and wants to hold the unions and companies accountable, or whether a pilot, like in my case, knows of a safety issue, which, by the way, is still out there because we just had a Lion Air 610 crash on October 29th, and the United pilots and the American pilots are disagreeing about what caused the crash and who's responsible. The entire pilot industry is filled with egotists and persons who are focused on money and cannot or will not call an ace an ace, a spade a spade, and stand up for the Airline Pilots Association has some very, very troubled attorneys. And what I mean by that is I have a civil case 1:08-1600 parentheses RMC for Rosemary M. Collier, and that case was dismissed without prejudice, and I will be bringing it again. I better be quiet and let you focus on Dan, but I've heard nothing but the truth out of him so far.
Well, thank you, Field. Dan, please continue.
Jason.
Yes.
Jason, I was contacted by a Dr. Janet Parker a couple of years after I met Field. She runs an organization called Medical Whistleblower, and I wound up being her transportation medical whistleblower. And what she does with the group globally is expose fraud, waste, and abuse in the medical field. And she was the first one that introduced me to the term forced hostile work environment, forced psychiatric exam. And she was the first one to tell me about Russell Tice. Well, people say, who in the heck is Russell Tice? Well, everyone's heard of Edward Snowden, the man that took the super top secret documents to Russia and exposed NSA illegal wiretapping. Mm-hmm. Russell Tice was the first one in NSA to expose this. He leaked it to the New York Times, who published the story. The NSA found out who it was. He ran before Congress and testified, but he didn't have the documents to prove what he was saying. It was so sensitive. And the NSA pulls him back in, runs him to a psychiatrist who declared, I can't remember what the diagnosis on him was. They pulled his top secret clearance and fired him from the NSA for it. It's going on all over the place. In the medical profession, if they want to get rid of you, they'll pull your medical license. Joe Stalin used to pull this tactic. Any political dissidents, he'd throw them in the loony bin and get rid of them that way.
Wow.
Anyhow, after I went through all this and got nowhere for 4 years with the Department of Transportation, I was in touch with, I was working for 2 years for the National Whistleblower Center and the Government Accountability Project in Washington, D.C., which are the two biggest whistleblower advocacy organizations in the world. And they told me pretty late in the game that a federal whistleblower in the United States stands less than a 2% chance of winning their case. So Tom Devine, the legal director of the Government Accountability Project, suggested that I file a federal tort claim against the U.S. government, which is basically a federal suit against the government for not fulfilling their responsibilities. So I searched around for an attorney to represent me. I was going to bring the Department of Justice, FAA, Department of Transportation, and Homeland Security to task to prove that they weren't guilty. And I couldn't find a lawyer. So my only hope was to file a pro se, represent myself in court, as Field had done in Washington, D.C. several years ago. And I actually used Field's format for a suit to write my suit up. And I sent an advance copy to the Department of Justice, who forwarded it to the FAA. And I got a letter from their chief attorney there, and he had a phone number on it. So I called him. And after a 30-minute heated debate, me explaining how long I'd been stonewalled, he laughed at me and said, "Go ahead and file the suit. You'll lose." And he hung up on me.
Who was it
that was the end of my case. The chief lawyer for the FAA.
Wow. So let's just take this a second. You're a pilot. You see something happening that's endangering the safety of passengers and aircraft in the United States, and all of the bodies that are intended to protect us as passengers, including the airlines that we pay to fly, the unions that protect you guys, the Federal Aviation Administration, are all conspiring to shut you up, put you out of business, financially decimate you, and keep us unsafe in the air and on the ground.
Exactly. If it's a high-cost item to the airline manufacturers or the company, or if it's going to cause a problem with the union, they'll get rid of you. I found out, talking to other whistleblowers, and I could mention a few names like Michael Driscoll, the Spirit Airlines whistleblower who was grounded. I found out that they crush your head like a grape. The whole world caves in on you. The existing federal whistleblower laws in the United States are not worth the paper they're written on.
Wow. That's really... Sorry, please continue.
So as far as 9/11 goes, I don't know if I'm reiterating what other people have said on your program, but there's several organizations out there trying to do something. The problem is with 9/11 whistleblowers, Jason and Field, and you'll agree with me here, is there's a lot of facts out there backed by solid evidence, proven by the scientific method, but no one has anywhere to go with them. You can't take them to the FBI. You can't take them to Homeland Security. You can't take them to the Department of Transportation. So there's a group out there called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Are you familiar with them?
Yes.
Okay. Well, they've got a group of 3,000 architects and engineers around the world who are demanding an investigation into 9/11 because Richard Gage, who is an email friend of mine and a Facebook friend, he's a 20-year architect from San Francisco. He founded Architects, and they have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that those airplanes and jet fuel, it was structurally impossible to bring down the Twin Towers.
Yep.
And they've given presentations around the world on this, but they can get nowhere with it with Congress. The other group is Scientists for 9/11 Truth. There's a 40-year chemist from the University of Copenhagen named Niels Harrit, Niels Harrit. Him and a team of scientists collected soil samples from the World Trade Center debris fields, and using the scientific method, they were able to conclusively prove that nanothermite, which is a substance used in the controlled demolition of buildings, was found in the debris field, leading to the conclusion that they were brought down by controlled demolition.
Yeah.
So, armed with, are you familiar with William Rodriguez?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, let me tell you a real quick story about William Rodriguez. He contacted me on Facebook initially and told me this story. But you can Google him, and he's got a lot of YouTube videos out there. Mm-hmm. William Rodriguez was the janitor in the World Trade Center.
Yes, I am familiar with him.
You do know about him?
Yes.
Should I continue with the story?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay, there were six sub-basements in the World Trade Center, and William Rodriguez was on one of them when the plane struck. Having keys to the door, he ran outside, unlocked doors, and followed firemen up the stairs to help bring people down. Just before the building collapsed, he was the last one to run out of the building. He jumped underneath the truck, and the buildings came crashing down, and a passerby happened to see him, came back with other people, and they managed to dig him out.
Wow.
Well, the media picked up the story and started calling him the last man out and the hero of 9/11. And Bush picked up on this story and invited William to the White House, and he presented him with a heroism award. And he was surrounded by congressmen and senators who were saying you should run for political office, things like that. Well, the fanfare quickly evaporated when he testified before committee, and he said, "Oh, by the way, right before the first airplane struck, there was a tremendous explosion that ripped out the floor beneath me. Mm-hmm. A man came running out of the elevator with skin dripping off of him." This was before the plane even struck.
Wow.
All of his publicity dried up. And for the last 17 years, I just saw he's down in Mexico now. For the last 17 years, William Rodriguez has traveled the world, including seeing the president of Malaysia, the president of Venezuela, and other people telling his story. The thing that amazes me is there's over 190 countries in the world. Where are the world leaders? Why don't they speak up? They can't all be stupid. They've heard these stories.
It's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I have to thank both of you guys for your bravery, because you come out with this kind of information, and as you're telling us, Dan, the world turns against you and caves in around you. So how have you been able to financially support yourself since you've been fired? Is there any way that members of the audience can help you get this word out? Do you have anything you want to tell people?
Knowing what I know now, I would have done it anyhow, but I would have done it in a different way. I didn't realize that I had so many forces working against me. When you step out in front of the truck and you think you have institutions to support you and they vaporize on you, it's a pretty lonely feeling, as field will attest. Mm-hmm. I'm getting about 1/3 of the pension I should have gotten because of the bankruptcy, during bankruptcy when they terminated this $10 billion pension, and I have my Social Security coming in. So I'm still out there after 17 years, only because I want to help expose this process of elimination of pilots. And because 9/11 was the crime of the century and millions have died as a result, in illegal and unwarranted wars. I feel, based on what I know and what other people know, that we should try to get the word out any way possible, the truth about 9/11, expose the lies. And Field's doing a damn good job of that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I should add that we were recently in Dallas at John B. Wells' Operation Classified, which was really a great event. I want to thank John B. Wells and encourage everybody to go to caravantomidnight.com and check out all of the video content. Field gave a number of really compelling presentations there. And of course, Field, what's the latest information as far as how people can find you online, Field? Bell Sheep Ministries? Have we got you there?
Actually, Olympia, here I am, and abledanger.org, and we do use the term Bell Sheep Ministry as, you know, our ministry outreach. But we're going to be starting something, and you may well want to do a show after we start it. It's the Children's Army, and it's a global where we're going to try and expose the pedophiles that are in our governments, and I mean the governments of England, the governments of Western Europe, the governments of Canada, and the government of the United States of America. And the pedophile issue is simply the glue that holds the entire evil network together. And once, and I do believe that President Trump is going to be unsealing some of those sealed indictments, and many sealed indictments will expose pedophilia on a grand scale. But that's speculation on my part. What I do know is that if anybody is interested in any with the illegal modifications to airliners that the airlines to this day will not discuss, because it goes back to 9/11, and the airlines collectively, all the airlines, including Asia and all the U.S. airlines, they all know that the aircraft have the drone capability built at the factory. They know that now, but they did not know that initially, because it was General Electric that put the illegal modifications into the Boeing aircraft. It was not Boeing. And that's where I parted company with my host down in Malaysia when I was to explain to them face-to-face how their aircraft, MH370, was taken to Diego Garcia. One of the 4 government people I met with said, and it's in a private conversation, nobody heard it but me, and it doesn't matter which one of the government people I was talking to, but that person said, this will become the world's first $1 trillion lawsuit.
Wow.
And I said, well, who is going to be defending? And I was told that the Boeing Corporation would be sued over the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. I told the gentleman, I said, then you're going to see me on the opposite side of the courtroom, because Boeing has been abused by General Electric. And I see that General Electric stock is going down fairly well. General Electric has replaced the CEO. The CEO that was in during 9/11, Jeffrey Immelt, IMMELT, he was replaced by another CEO, and that CEO has either left or is on his way out. General, largest corporate footprints of any corporation I'm familiar with when it comes to 9/11, and they simply are not going to be able to survive if there's a 9/11 investigation. And you know, when Trump was, he frequently said that he would be in favor of reinvestigating 9/11. And I think there's some very powerful and evil people in the world that would like Donald Trump not to do that, up to the point that they would be willing to give the 9/11 treatment the same treatment that JFK got. When JFK tried to be a hero to the American worker and taxpayer, JFK was terminated, and most of the people that participated in the murder of JFK are now dead, but at least one of them is alive and kicking, and that person also has a very large footprint on 9. So I really applaud you, Jason, for having Dan Hanley on, and I want to thank Dan Hanley personally on this radio show for his telling me what happens to pilot whistleblowers, because it was Dan Hanley told me that on Tuesday, December 5th of 2006, and everything Dan told would happen happened. But before I went to the shrink, I picked up the phone and retired. The only thing I've heard Dan Hanley misspeak on so far is he suggests 11 years early, and I'm just correcting him so people know that Dan and I are not a tag team trying to mislead anyone. I retired 8 years early, and I did give up multiple millions of dollars in lost pay and lost retirement. You know what? Integrity is not always for sale. Mine wasn't, and Dan Hanley's was not. So thank you, Jason, for having us both over you.
Well, Field, thank you for introducing me to Dan. We've got a little bit of a rough connection on you, but I think people can hear what you're saying, and this is really one of the strongest broadcasts I've had the opportunity to participate in. And you were alluding to this, but I think I know who you're talking about with regard to the footprint both in Dealey Plaza in 1963, just 55 years ago yesterday, and 9/11. It's our mutual least favorite guy in the world, George H.W. Bush. And I'm just showing everybody the Zapruder film here. It really is a travesty that this man continues to roll around rather than being locked up in prison where he deserves to go. But I think I'm in total agreement with both of you. I do have a question, however. We've spoken, Field, in the past about the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. We've spoken also about the multiple eyewitness accounts on 9/11 of a black or dark gray airplane that had no windows. And I know, Field, recently you and I have spoken about the military configuration of the Boeing 767 that I believe is an E-10. Is that correct?
Yes. The Air Force had asked for a replacement aircraft to be an upgrade over the electronic versions of the 707, which in the military is called the C-135 or the KC-135 or the EC-135. Boeing built at least one prototype, Echo 10, E-10. The Air Force didn't buy it, and a woman working at CEO named Darlene, and I have trouble with her last name, but Drunion maybe. That era, the E-10 was made available to the perpetrators of 9/11, and I'm speaking for myself alone, Field McConnell. I'm not speaking for Jason or Dan, but it's my belief that G.H.W. Bush is the most responsible party behind the cowardly attack of 9/11, and my own sister, Christine Marcy, helped, and the relationship between Christine Marcy and George H.W. Bush is that in when he was a CIA person, he got my sister to a federal bureaucracy known as the Senior Executive Service. It was done with the approval of Jimmy Carter, the president, but my sister, Christine Marcy, is the guilty party, but she shares the guilt with George H.W. Bush. And when 9/11 truth comes, and it is coming because it can't be stopped at this point, but I'd love nothing more than to see 9/11 be reinvestigated during the Trump presidency. And I think President Trump would like to do it, but he doesn't like Kennedy did. So he's being protected by some very committed U.S. Marine generals. 3 of them off the top of my head include Joseph Dunford, John Kelly, and James Mattis, known as Mad Dog. But the evil parties behind 9/11 are people, corporations behind 9/11 are known, and what United did to Dan Hanley and what Northwest did to me is it's simply the acts of a cowardly corporate when they are exposed for their wrongdoing, including the wrongful deaths or murders for hire in the 22 aircraft that I addressed at Operation Classified, where I saw you on the weekend of 9 to 11, which is 9/11, isn't it? But 9 to 11 November of this year, we were both in Dallas.
Yeah.
And, by the way, just to interject a little bit of optimism, I'm being interviewed by Caravan to Midnight or Patriot Soapbox tonight at 8 p.m. Central. I'm not even sure which of those entities is interviewing me or if it's going to be live, but I will try to find out. I know it's 8 p.m. I know, and you met the man, by the way, that called me. His name is John Roberson, and John Roberson is the producer of Caravan to Midnight and Art Midnight. And I think the reason they called me on short notice to be interviewed tonight is because they're getting so many people that were at Operation Classified, responding. They've got like 160,000 hits on my Friday speaking event. And there's people around the world really wishing they'd post my Sunday speaking event. But actually, the truth is, the Friday speaking event, I really opened up and let her rip. And by Sunday, I was asked to tone it down a little bit. And Jason, you know that I'm not really the type of guy who's going to tone it down for anybody. So no. I'll just end with that comment. But my sister and George H.W. Bush need to be held accountable for 9/11. Over to you.
I agree with you, Field. It was a great presentation at Operation Classified, and people can just Google Field McConnell Treasonous Acts Operation Classified and listen. Field has got an amazing way of presenting information about the most treacherous deeds, but yet making it engaging, entertaining, and even humorous. Although it's not funny. I mean, we can look back on it now years later, and we need to have some comic relief. But I agree with you, Field. I'm really hopeful that President Trump will take some action. I think that the things that we've been seeing in terms of the Robert Mueller investigation, the fake nonsense about Russia collusion, etc. Now they're saying that Ivanka Trump sent emails from private emails. So everything that they're coming up with every single week seems to be another attempt to distract Trump, to keep him away from the task of draining the swamp, which is a broad statement that would include exposing 9/11. Of course, Robert Mueller was the FBI director 1 week before 9/11 occurred. He spent the entire 12 years of his tenure as the FBI director not exposing the 28-page report from Senator Graham, from Senator Graham's Intelligence Committee. Bob Graham had a 28-page report implicating Saudi diplomats, wiring money, etc. I tend to agree with both of you that there were no Muslim pilots, but Saudi Arabia seems to have participated, at least in the cover-up, the distraction, the financing, etc. There were Israeli participants, of course, Dov Zakheim. We've heard a lot of disinformation related to 9/11 as well. So And you know, there's an important difference between disinformation and misinformation. Misinformation could be an honest mistake. Disinformation is nonsense from people like John Lear saying that holograms hit the World Trade Center. There is no technological evidence or even theoretical explanation of how that would have worked. Field, you and I did a video debunking that nonsense hologram theory. I just want to ask you guys, because we've seen radar data that shows the commercial airliners flying over a U.S. military base and then doing a really sharp U-turn and coming back. We also have the historical documents, Operation Northwoods from 1960 or 61, whenever it was, where the CIA had proposed the concept of crashing commercial airliners, hijacking them, blaming it on Cuba. Kennedy rejected this plan, but we can look at these different pieces and put them together to provide evidence of intention of this type of plan. Do either of you guys think that it's possible that the uninterruptible autopilot was used to deflect the commercial airplanes and then replace them with a military plane that could have been controlled by perhaps a more precise remote autopilot device and crash that, at least into the South Tower of the World Trade Center?
That's exactly what I think happened. If you look at the flight termination system and you look at the fact that it shuts off your transponder and all external communications, the transponder is used by air traffic control to identify aircraft in flight, which incidentally was the same thing that occurred with Malaysia Air 370. They lost communications, the airplane did a couple turns, and then disappeared out over the ocean. I believe it was an air. I can't prove this, Jason, but there's other books out there that agree with this, that all facts point to the conclusion that the only way that a Boeing uninterruptible autopilot equipped airplane could have done it is if there was an airborne swap. Now, what happened to the passenger planes? That's the mystery. Field believes that they were taken out in the warning area in New England and destroyed. There's an author out there named Rebecca Roth, believes they were flown to Westover Air Force Base, forced to make phone calls on the ground, which incidentally, you couldn't make cell phone calls in 2001 from the air. And they were snuffed in the hangar. The ultimate whistleblower, do you know Philip Marshall?
Yes.
Okay. For those that don't know, he was the United Airline pilot that had written 2 books on 9/11. And he was going to write, he was in the process of writing a 3rd book. The second one was The Big Bamboozle. The first one, I think, was called False Flag. And the 3rd one was going to be Lakefront Airport. Well, they found Philip in his California home. His 2 kids and the family dog had been shot, and he was shot in the head. And the police called it a suicide murder. A murder-suicide, I mean.
Yeah. Well, and there were so many anomalies in the evidence. He was laying on top of the gun and, you know, shot multiple times. Why would you bother to kill your dog? Neighbors, friends, family said there was absolutely no indication whatsoever that he would do anything like that to his children. He loved his children. He even told his next door neighbor the day before it occurred that he was in fear of his life because of this book that he was writing. And I've recently heard that the explosive information that was going to go into the book were the 28 pages, or at least that he had the 28 pages of Bob Graham's Senate Intelligence Committee report implicating Bandar bin Sultan, his wife, and a 3rd Saudi diplomat in funding. And I mean, again, you know, I don't have any kind of government access. I've never been an airline pilot. I've never been a military officer or a law enforcement officer. But the interesting thing that I've had the frankly amazing opportunity to do is that I accidentally stumbled onto this idea called Crowdsource the Truth, where I've created this hub that now, after 2 years, so many people like you guys, like so many others, come here and share their stories with me and the audience. And so I get all these different pieces. For instance, I never heard of Dov Zakheim until Scott Bennett told me about him, and now I want to introduce you to Scott, and perhaps we can do another roundtable like the one that we did.
I want to point out something about Dov Zakheim. In the 90s, he was the CEO of a System Planning Corporation, and that is the company that developed the flight termination system. 6 months before 9/11, Bush appointed him as comptroller to the Pentagon.
Yes.
Who oversaw the auditors that were looking into the $2.3 trillion that Don Rumsfeld, as Secretary of Defense, announced the day before 9/11 was missing. And all those auditors, 32 of those auditors were killed, because that's exactly where whatever that projectile that hit the Pentagon hit that day.
Exactly. And I'm looking here at the foreign... Sorry, Dan, please continue.
Talking about poorly trained, inexperienced pilots flying the 9/11 airplanes. People argue, well, it wouldn't be that difficult to hit the Twin Towers. But if you look at the Pentagon profile, where they came in from the north, arrived overhead the Pentagon at 7,000 feet, 500 knots, did a descending, high rate of descent turn, corkscrew turn, 330 degrees to arrive a few feet above the ground at the Pentagon level without skidding the ground, and then hitting the Pentagon and Naval Intelligence Service, where Field's friend was lost. You look at the size of the hole in the Pentagon. You look at the lack of wreckage. You look at the no wing marks on the building. I believe an airplane did not strike the Pentagon.
I agree with you.
You too, Phil?
Are you asking me, Jason?
Yes. I know Field agrees. No
okay.
plane.
Oh, okay.
Well, wait, no, Field thinks it's an F4 or something. Tell us, Field.
Yeah, it was not an airliner that hit what hit the Pentagon first was a forward-firing piece of ordnance built by Raytheon Corporation, and it was the equivalent of a bunker buster type munition that blew a hole in the Pentagon. That's why there's that nice round hole, but it was launched from a Raytheon owned. This is incredible how big Raytheon is, in 9/11. But a Raytheon A3 is the launch vehicle for the bunker busting missile, and the Raytheon A3 is linked to John McCain. John McCain's last flying job in the was as the squadron commander of a reserve Douglas A3 attack squadron. And John McCain's fingerprints are all over 9/11, just like my own sister, Christine Marcy, and George H.W. Bush. And whereas some of these people have wound up dead, like the pilot that had his 2 children and his dog shot, I don't intend to wind up dead over 9/11, but I'll tell you, 9/11 could not have been done if it wasn't for the pedophiles controlling the shadow government of the United States of America. So when I die, and I will die, Jason, so will you, so will Dan Hanley. When I'm dead, people that are aware will probably will over the pedophile issue, because 25 million kids going missing a year is not okay with me. And the adrenochrome that people like, well, I won't name names on this except for George H.W. Bush and my sister and him and John McCain, but the adrenochrome that these evil people think will extend their life, it will not extend their life, and their eternity is probably in a very hot place, much hotter than Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where they might be able to work on their tan before they test the rope. The people that have been trying to destroy the United States of America have been using pedophilia as their get-out-of-jail-free card, because all of their fellow pedophiles have to do what corporations do, And corporations, and the FAA, by the way, is a corporation, and Airline Pilots Association is a corporation, and corporations have tried to destroy the United States of America. They will not get the United States destroyed. That's my opinion. But in my life, I fully expect to see pedophilia dealt with and 9/11 reinvestigated. And I want to give you a compliment. I know that some very close friends of mine are critics of yours, Jason. But I am not your critic. But one of the reasons I'm not your critic is because I could care less if you're doing this as a standalone person, which that's my experience, that's what you're doing. If you were working for George H.W. Bush or Dov Zakheim or whoever he is, or Mike Sherda, or Admiral J.M. Cohen, if you're working for somebody else, I don't, it's not my problem. You know, what I do admire is your willingness to broadcast this. And it's only when more and more people find out the depth of the depravity of what's behind 9/11, that being pedophilia, you know, at some are going to come more than just 100 at a time. I've been around the world just like Dan has. And I've never, ever met a person who will look me in the eye and say that they think pedophilia is not okay. And yet, if someone has pedophilia in their history, they can get forgiven for that. You know, the parents may not forgive you, the children may not forgive you, but in terms of the ultimate forgiveness, it's available. So, I will, I see that you have a hard time hearing me, so I'll turn it back over to you. But I'm very optimistic that both pedophilia will be dealt with and 9/11 will be reinvestigated. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much, Field. Now, I want to ask you guys briefly, you know, I've got a new app here that allows me to consolidate the chat from our 2 YouTube channels, the Periscope channel, vk.com, and we've got a lot of questions coming in here. So people have been asking questions. If you guys have some time, I can take some questions from the chat room and we can have a little bit of interactivity with some of the audience members.
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, and also, Field, I will reassure you, thank you for saying that. I am definitely not working for George H.W. Bush, Dov Zakheim, or anyone but myself. Crowdsource the Truth is a fully audience-funded operation, and I do rely on people becoming subscribers at patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth to keep it going. I actually hate the guys that you're talking about. I think they're enemies to not only the United States of America, but to every human on Earth. And 9/11 is one of the greatest atrocities ever to occur. I watched the World Trade Center burn with my very own eyes from the roof of this building that I'm in right now. I lost friends in that building, and as we've all agreed, it has changed the world for the far worse. So let's see what our chat room has to say here. So someone, yeah, a lot of stupid comments in the chat room. Dan, is there anything you'd like to add while I'm waiting for a sensible question to come up here in the chat room?
Okay. Well, if I had any message to give anyone, and the National Whistleblower Center may not agree with me here, but never imagine that today's whistleblower laws will protect you. Never imagine that you're going to be able to bring forward charges and get a fair shake. The whole system's rigged against you. You won't win.
I'm sorry to make this into a personal issue, Field, but we've got our friend Craig here, who goes by Able Danger on YouTube, and I believe it is a gross misuse of your brand. He's telling me that he's sure that I have new apps because it's the best way to capture all intel and that I'm fully funded. Why lie? Craig, you know something? If you were truly a man of honor, you would have come and spoken to me at Operation Classified. I thought to do that, but then out of respect for Field, out of respect for John B. Wells, and out of respect for the general public, and realization that you, sir, are an asshole, I did not bother to do that. So I'm going to need to ask you to, sorry, let me calm down. Craig, you're a moron. You have no evidence. You have maligned me. You've created a fight between Field and David, and you need to get yourself set straight. Sorry, guys.
Oh, that's okay. Can I address that?
Please.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to address it. Yeah. There's some people in the chat room here, meaning your chat room on YouTube, that is quoting me. And that's how a lot of these things that don't need to be issues become issues. And somebody just put in your own chat room that I have been critical of Jason Goodman. No, I did say about 20 minutes ago that even if you were working for someone, it wouldn't slow me down. I'd still tell you everything I know. And here's my on who I assume everybody's a good person until they prove to me that. But even if somebody I speak to is working for the other team, that's okay, because I'm going to scare their boss. In other words, if Dan Hanley was working for Robert Mueller and Dan Hanley asked me to issue my opinion of Robert Mueller, I would say I have communicated personally with Robert Mueller regarding aviation safety, and he has fallen short of the responsibilities of his office. So what I'm saying is Robert Mueller is a big part of the problems with the United States of America. And my sister and Robert Mueller used to work together at the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice has some real shady characters in their history, including Janet Reno, Christine Marcy, Jamie Grelick, and Robert Mueller. Now, Robert Mueller is still alive and reportedly well. I challenge Robert Mueller to contact me, and maybe he can tell me why, when I wrote him a letter on the 14th of February of 2007, and I stated that Adam Air 574 was taken down with the Boeing uninterruptible auto. And then I don't know where I got the nerve to say this, but then I stated in that letter 11 years ago, Adam Air 574, which was destroyed on the 1st of January of 2000, on the 14th of February of 2007, I told Robert right to his face or his ear that it would not be the last hull loss, HULLLOSS. I told him, I said, you're going to see a lot more hull losses if you don't go after the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. Okay, 15 more airliners since Adam Air 574 have been destroyed, and Robert Mueller's fingerprints are all over it, just like my sister, Christine Marcy, and just like George H.W. Bush. Over to you, Jason.
And it's no surprise, of course, Field, that Robert Mueller is heading up this special counsel investigation against President Donald Trump. Many legal experts have told me Robert Mueller has greatly exceeded the mandate of the special counsel's office. There needs to be a specific crime that's being investigated. The special counsel does not have free rein to investigate every person who has ever dealt with, done business with, or spoken to Donald Trump until he finds some crime. And in fact, other legal experts, including Sidney Powell, who was with us at Operation Classified, has gone to great lengths. In her book, License to Lie, she talks about how the Justice Department, just as Captain Dan Hanley was sort of cornered and put in this mental hospital, you know, he's obviously a totally sane man who was railroaded. The Department of Justice is frequently exercising its powers to intimidate and force people into situations where they have to take these plea deals. The latest target of Robert Mueller's investigation is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Everyone knows Dr. Corsi is a friend of mine. I've communicated with him. I don't know anything about Dr. Corsi's past beyond about 2 years ago when I met him, and in my experience, he is a kind and honest man who's doing his best, like everybody else here, to find the truth. And I firmly believe that Dr. Corsi is under a lot of mental duress from this Department of Justice assault. He did a broadcast in which he said he expects to be indicted. I frankly would be surprised by that. I have a feeling what we may see is a similar type of indictment as what happened to General Michael Flynn, where they wrap you up in all this questioning and they find a way to trick you into making some sort of statement that they can then turn around and use this 18 USC 1001. Same thing they hit Scott Bennett with. There's a playbook. They're using that playbook, and I think they're trying to get to key people who can damage the Clintons, the Bushes, and the key members of this cabal. So it's a very strategic legal assault. People in the chat room are reminding us that John Brennan provided passports when he was the station chief in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He's another one who's very active criticizing President Trump. Well, we're not getting too much in the way of questions here from the chat room. It's mostly commentary. If either of you gentlemen would have anything that you'd like to share with us in closing, I invite you to do so. We've been speaking for about 90 minutes, and it is Friday night, so I'm sure you both have wives to get back to. Anything you want to share with us, Dan, before we go?
I'm very active on Facebook, and I put out a lot of 9/11 information. I'm full up with 5,000 friends, but I got a lot of followers. So Dan Hanley is on Facebook. If you want to follow me, please feel free to do so. I encourage it.
And are you on Twitter or anywhere else people can find you? Of course, you've got your...
just Facebook.
Okay. And of course, your website, the Airline Employees Association Whistleblower website, people can go there, airline-whistleblower.blogspot.com.
You can Google Captain Dan Hanley and some other stuff out there.
And Field, of course, people can find his work at abeldanger.org, and that's ABEL Danger. Field's got a lot of radio broadcasts, YouTube shows, posts of all kinds on there. Field, anything you'd like to leave us with before we wrap it up tonight?
Yeah, I just encourage your listeners to take every single word that Dan Hanley spoke as the truth. And if anyone wants to look back on this 90 minutes, Dan Hanley was very, very disciplined in expressing when he was about ready to issue an opinion versus a fact. And I try to do the same thing. I try to speak of facts. And the facts are that John McCain, George H.W. Bush, Christine Marcy, my sister, and Hillary Clinton, along with GE and Raytheon and Wells Fargo, have their fingerprints all over 9. And there is justice coming. If it doesn't come in this world, people that did 9/11 and the pedophiles that hurt children are really not going to enjoy the world that awaits them. Thank you for this opportunity to speak, Jason.
Thank you, Field, and thank you for introducing me to Dan. It's been a pleasure speaking to both of you. And Dan, thank you so much for introducing Field and David. I'm so glad that we're putting this bigger picture together and people have had a chance to meet you. What you've done is so important, so brave. Everybody's got to really thank you, Dan, because without people like you and Field standing up for what's right in the face of tremendous adversity, we would be lost. We're hanging on by a thread right now, and I appreciate you both tremendously and wish you a happy weekend and the best of luck and everything in the future, and we'll have you back again soon.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
And thanks everyone
Thank
for
you.
watching. Thanks very much. I hope people will go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and sponsor the show. I could not continue this work without our generous Patreon sponsors. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. I'll see you on Sunday for another episode of Sunday with Charles.